We're at number 9 for the top 10 episodes of the Couple Money Podcast. Becoming debt-free is a wonderful achievement. What makes it even sweeter is when the two of you are working together towards it. Sometimes, though, things don't always start off on the right foot. When Tony and her husband wanted to get out of debt, they weren't on the same wavelength on how to get it done. But they found a way to respect one another and dig out of 6 figures of debt. From the downloads alone, I see this is a huge episode for you. And I have to admit, this is a personal favorite of mine too. Money in marriage can be difficult, but if the two of you are willing to work together, you can be an unstoppable team. I really hope you enjoyed this episode.
Looking to build your marriage and money? You've come to the right place. The Couple Money Podcast. Here's your host, Elle Martinez.
Welcome to another episode of the Couple Money Podcast, where we talk about building up your marriage and your net worth. Today's topic addresses one of the biggest obstacles to that, having disagreements about money. For the vast majority of couples, coming up with a budget, paying down debt, or saving for a goal takes time. Not just because you're following through on a plan, but it takes time to come to an agreement. The focus for this episode is to find solutions to help couples communicate better and more honestly with each other. We'll open up by discussing why we argue about money and how we can diffuse tense situations and topics. We also have Tony from Debt Free Divas share her family story about digging out of more than $100,000 of debt. What makes it even more amazing is that when she and her husband began, they weren't on the same page as to how to reach that goal. Now, though, they're out of their personal debt and they're working towards building an even stronger marriage. Finally, we'll go over some tips to effectively compromise so both of you are happy with whatever plan you come up with. No matter how your marriage started out, at some point the honeymoon is over and the two of you are dealing with the realities of the day-to-day. Many times, the big eye-opener is disagreements about money. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Lori Pune, a couples mediator, commented that having arguments about finances can be expected with married couples. The truth is, most of the time, it's not necessarily the numbers, but it's what we bring to the marriage that causes us to bicker and nitpick. Our previous experiences with money have a huge impact on how we view it and how we act towards it. Maybe we picked up unproductive habits because of our role models. If money was a tense topic growing up, or we've seen the big issues sidestep to completely avoid fights, then you may feel unprepared on how to best talk about it. Differences in cultures can be another source of tension. One of you may have family who expects you to take care of them when they get older, while the other was raised with the idea that each generation is self-sufficient. Don't forget, we also have unique personalities. I can tell you that some of the traits that made me fall in love with my husband can also be some of the more frustrating ones to deal with when we have a disagreement. His thoughtful and deliberate discussions become dragging his feet with big decisions. Or at least that's how I feel in the moment. This isn't about making excuses. This is about understanding where your spouse is coming from. Once you can both see why each other's approaching this from a certain perspective, it can make it easier to work with them. Having differences of opinions doesn't mean that your marriage is doomed. How you communicate with one another can, though. Misunderstandings can quickly snowball into arguments and shouting matches, depending on your personalities. So just how do you talk about money? I have a couple suggestions. Write it down. Before you two get together to talk about your finances, make some time to jot down your thoughts and feelings about it. It can serve you in a few ways. Help you identify your end goal and release some of your emotions. Choose to meet at a time and place that is relaxing for the both of you. Make this situation as comfortable as possible so you're in a better mood to listen. You also might want to have a set time to start and finish so you don't feel like this will go on forever. Both sides need to talk. Let each of you have some uninterrupted time to express your thoughts and feelings about the situation. While the other one is talking, make sure you're paying attention to what they're saying. Take notes if you have to. If you're worried about one going over the limit, set up a timer. Find common ground. Once you both have spoken about it, try to see if you can come to an agreement on something and work from there. Break it down. If you're still having trouble coming up with an overall plan for your goal, see if you can back it up a bit and agree on the first step. I believe one of the best ways you can change your habits is by emulating positive and productive models. One of my favorite podcasts is Better Conversations on Money and Marriage. I'm including a link to them in the show notes because I think they have some really helpful information for couples looking at improving their chats about money. Derek and Carrie discuss working through a money crisis together, becoming parents, and how they're budgeting as they go through life's transitions. Right now, though, we have Toni coming up in the next segment to share how she and her husband work through their differences to pay off over $100,000 of debt. As a personal finance writer, I love coming across stories about how people reached a milestone with their money, especially when it involves overcoming a challenge. There are so many external setbacks that can come up and discourage you as you pay down debt, build savings, or invest. With couples, there's another layer to add as a possible setback or derailment for your plans, and that's working with each other. Two heads may be better than one, but it doesn't feel that way when they want to go in different directions. Recently, I spoke with a wonderful woman named Toni, whose story is a realistic and fantastic example of how couples can repair and build their wealth while respecting their differences. Like other spouses, Toni and her husband Colin brought some debt into their marriage.
Came into the marriage when we got married in 2002. Both of us, brought our own debt. I had student loans. He had, credit card, some pretty sizable credit card, and then of course we were buying cars, leasing cars. Just things that normal people do once they start to get married and put down roots.
Over the years, their debt accumulated, but with their good-paying IT jobs, they could afford the payments. At various points, Toni and her husband attempted to rein in their spending. On top of their joint finances, the couple looked beyond and took on a challenge as they started a business with the dream of helping to develop a neighborhood.
So not only did we acquire the typical things, we thought, we're going to, we really felt led to go into ministry here in the city. I live in Chicago, here in the city, and we're really interested in doing some economic development in the inner city community. So we're like, let's start a business, right? Decided, after much research and prayer and consternation, we decided to open a laundromat.
With all these balls in play, and Toni having to oversee their new business venture, they had a chance to reflect on their financial situation. Fortunately for them, a trip with family was going to have an impact on Toni for how they could tackle it.
Conference with my mother in Detroit, and my mother and I are both avid readers, so she actually went to, in her conference, something for her job. One of the workshops was led by Dave Ramsey. So I was like, okay, well, I had that weekend to read The Total Money Makeover, which I did, which is a feat for me because I'm a slow reader. I love to read, but I'm a slow reader. So I read that whole book in 2 days, and the light came on for me. Click. It made sense. It was simple. I was like, we can do this. This was my perspective.
For those not familiar with Dave Ramsey, he's a personal financial guru, radio host, and author of the bestseller Total Money Makeover. The book takes readers through a specific series of steps on how they can get out of debt and redo their finances. Over the years, families with different incomes and amounts of debt have used this particular book as their financial guide to help them build wealth. And of course, with this new plan in mind, Toni's expecting her husband to be just as enthusiastic as she is.
Was all excited about it, took it home, took the concept home to my husband, and he was just like, yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm telling you, and it wasn't necessarily like, no, I don't want to get out of debt. It's like, yeah, but what about this? Only $1,000 in savings. What if this, it was an intellectual discussion about, this does not make sense to me, and there's no way, it was a very intellectual, very elongated, and at this process, we're barreling towards the laundromat, mind you.
For some, this would have been enough to have them quit or dig in their heels and insist on the other spouse to make the changes. But Toni had a different take on the situation, one that involved looking at the big picture and finding a solution that worked for both of them.
you have one imperfect person marrying another imperfect person coming together for a very imperfect union, you know?
Yes.
And it's, I think we expect, or this is my generalization, but with my friends and myself included, you know, we expect that things should work a certain way. And so when they don't, it's just like the end of the world. And and I just cannot believe that you don't see things the way I see things, you know, perfect way. And what is wrong with you? And so, there must be something wrong with me. And so I think that, you know, number one, just be patient. You didn't get into debt overnight. Likely you're not going to, you know, without an inheritance or winning the lottery, you're not going to get out of debt overnight. And so I think just, you know, it's important to just be patient with yourself. My goodness, be patient with the other person, you know, and you know, start where you can. You know, if your partner is not on board with you, if that spouse is not, you know, for whatever reason, it might be just ornery, curmudgeonry, or they may feel like they have a legitimate intellectual opposing argument. You know, that's probably gonna happen. So I say just do what you can where you can, and I feel like when you are consistent and when you show consistency, that helps another person get on board and say maybe there is something to this. It was mostly me in the beginning, staying consistent. And that's one of the things I definitely like to tell people. When you have some conflict or you're not on the same page, do what you can do and do it consistently and see if that other person doesn't come on board. And that's what happened. It was like, you know, a lot of times you're like, well, if you would do this and if you would stop doing that, then we could get out of debt. Now, what can you do yourself? You know, make some changes, and maybe that other person needs to see that you're committed and you're not just talking, or you're not just expecting them to make all the changes, right? It's like, yeah, you eat lunch every day, and the lunch is a big one. I'll have to go back to that one. So you took your lunch, but what can I do? Am I taking my lunch? Am I a big thing was beauty, right? My own hair versus going to the salon, doing, you know, maybe cutting back manicure, you know, just the little things that we don't think about that we think they have to be part of our regular routine actually are ways for us to make pretty significant adjustments. And start to see some small wins. And so the thing about it is when we paid off that first credit card, which was probably a small one, we ended up kind of incorporating a less expensive lifestyle. So we lived and we enjoyed life. I find, first of all, I live in a pretty great city summer-wise. Weather-wise in the winter, leaves something to be desired. In the summer, Chicago is a great town, and you can really do some interesting things and not spend a lot of money. Yeah. So we enjoyed ourselves. We took in, you know, every festival that there was to take in. We, you know, would do things at the lake. We have, you know, a great church community, so we're involved there. So we lived life and we enjoyed life. That's the other thing that I try to, you know, encourage people is to find ways to enjoy life in ways. Now I didn't go to, you know, $200 concerts. You know, I think somebody was in town recently. It's $250 for a concert. I was like, how much is their CD? You know, I just know, whatever. You know, I'm dating myself on the CD. But you know, we could do some of the more extravagant activities. Yeah, it wasn't. I honestly don't think I missed out on much.
With these changes and results happening, Tony's enthusiasm for the total money makeover finally caught on.
You're working at that snowball. We no longer have this chase card. We can start applying that money to something else. Then the momentum kicks in. And so then, you know, it probably took maybe a year and a half, 2 years, you know, of being myself, it's not every month, but as consistent as I could be to actually get my husband on board.
Instead of dwelling on when he jumped in on the plan, Tony respected and appreciated that her husband did come around. She also knew that money wasn't going to be a wedge in their marriage and their happiness.
When we really started to kind of cut back and focus and still try to, and I still traveled. That was my one thing, traveling. You know, I would cause a debt snowball in a minute for a trip. But, so that's another reason probably it took a little bit longer. But those are some, again, adult decisions that you make. You know that if you spend money here, then it's going to affect the time frame that you're trying to get out of debt. And I was okay with that. I was totally okay with that. And that may have been one of the other approaches that I took that kept me going. You can look at it both ways. Maybe I could have been out of debt a little bit sooner, but I had, I had an amazing experience over this last, 7, 10 years now, 12 years of marriage, that I would not trade. And on top of that, we both have come to a point where we are better.
After years of working together as a team, Toni and Colin had paid off around $107,000 of debt. I asked her what it was like, what their life was now, and she painted a happy, realistic picture of how their family was doing.
A lot closer. We make money decisions, I think, a lot smoother now. I think we trust each other a lot more, around our decisions. We trust each other's judgment. And that's, again, only come from sticking with something, sticking through it, going through the ups and the downs, the highs and the lows. And it hasn't been easy. There have been some times where I've gone on and I'm not speaking to you. I would not like to repeat it, but I would not trade that experience, for anything.
When I first talked to Toni about how they got out of debt, I was overwhelmed with everything that had happened over the years. But after taking a step back, a few points kept popping up in my mind. Some factors that I think made a key difference to their success, not just with getting rid of the debt, but staying strong in their marriage. The first thing that struck me was how Toni took Colin's reaction. She could have easily been furious with his unwillingness to try it out and ignore his concerns. After all, she had spent time, reading the book and thinking about how the total money makeover plan could change their lives and how they could execute it. But she didn't. Instead, she allowed him to voice his objections and his concerns, and she acknowledged that there was some legitimacy to them. I also admire how they compromised when it came to getting out of debt. It wasn't what I expected, but it worked. For Toni, it meant taking the baby steps first, and then winning her husband over through the results. You may be thinking, well, that's not a compromise because he didn't go through the plan with her. While that's true that she began the total money makeover alone, Colin was still on board with getting out of debt and trimming back on their lifestyle. They worked together on finding inexpensive ways to enjoy their marriage and family. He made sacrifices and changes to his own habits. That helped with getting the initial $400 debt snowball started, and eventually it grew to $2,000 a month. That takes teamwork and commitment. When you think of compromise, it doesn't necessarily mean you both have to give up the exact same things. It could mean that the two of you sit down and discuss what changes you're each willing to make and then stand by them. It's a joint effort, but you two may have different ideas on how to get there. So use those differences to your benefit. If you and your spouse are having money disagreements and arguments, I hope this episode helps the two of you find a way to brainstorm a solution for your finances and find a way to work together and respect your differences. I want to thank Toni for coming on the show. She graciously gave her story, and I loved to hear her takeaways from the experience. She was so honest about what worked and what didn't work for them. You can find out more about her and her journey on debtfreedivas.com. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to subscribe to the podcast or get show notes for this episode, go to couplemoneypodcast.com. You can sign up with iTunes, Stitcher, or you can grab the feed directly for your own player. Coming up next week on the Couple Money Podcast, we talk about saving up for a baby. My husband and I are expecting our second child in a few months, and soon we'll be hit with some big expenses, including our daughter's arrival. I'll share what we learned from the first time around, give you some of the numbers, and tell you how we're preparing now. Have a great day.